So one force that technology has brought to humanity that I think is underrated, that I tend to be mindful about, I tend to pay a lot of attention to, I call persistence. And if there's a better word, let me know when I'm done explaining it. It's a short word, but it's not a common word. So what do I mean by persistence? I don't mean like I keep booking you because I'm persistent. I mean that things that you leave in cyberspace are persistent. They stay there. And I think we underrate this as an effect in human life. The fact that I can leave a tweet, a post, a book, a movie, code, software out in this space, and then it stays there. And you couldn't do this with previous technologies. You couldn't do it and reach a whole bunch of people around the globe at almost no cost. So I'll add those things to it. You could, if you were lucky, carve some letters into a stone and see that whoever walked by would see what the letters were. But chances are that the person carving wasn't the person authoring the words, so you didn't have a lot of freedom of speech there. You could try to publish a book, but you had to find a publisher. You had to go through the expense, and the book still costs money, right? And a bestseller is what, 50,000 books and above, or something like that. A bestseller back in 1800 was 300 books and above. Who knows? But all of a sudden today, anybody, and I'll qualify anybody immediately, anybody with access to the internet, anybody who's making more than $2 a day, which we just cut off a third of the population of Earth. But that number of people who have access is growing swiftly. And growing as swiftly actually not as computers make their way around, but cell phones make their way around. Because it turns out that some 4.3 or 4.4 billion cell phones are out on Earth. There are more people with access to a cell phone than with access to a latrine, or any kind of safe sanitation. So more people can get to a cell phone and do something with a cell phone than can poop in a way that doesn't soil their lake or whatever else is going on. It's just amazing. So all these people can do things and leave things in this place, I guess we call cyberspace, whatever you want to call it. And the effects of that are remarkable, because I can post something on my blog, for example, and I can turn around and walk away. And that thing stays out there. And even if somebody else doesn't like my idea, if they really deeply disagree with it, they can't do much about it. It's really hard to take down somebody's blog. You have to go through a lot of trouble. The country of Egypt tries to shut down its internet, and they get all kinds of backlash from everybody in the world. Hey, you can't go doing that. There's a guy named Ethan Zuckerman who wrote something called the cute cat theory of internet censorship. And he says, if you're a regime and you're going to censor the internet, you're going to have to censor all those nonsense conversations about look how cute my cat is, and here's a picture, along with the troubling speech you're trying to censor, because it's all in the same pool. It's not like you can target one and get rid of them easily. So that's for essays and movies and music and whatnot. And then code is even this extra special thing, because software, I could pick up your software and then I can improve it a little bit and give it back to you, or put it somewhere else. If I disagree with what you're doing with it, I can put it somewhere else and fork it. And software just builds and builds and builds and builds. So this force feeds a couple of the other forces I want to mention. But I just want to say that we've not been able to do this thing, to leave something persistently for other people at very low cost, since not just history, but also prehistory. Since the beginning of mankind, however back you want to roll the clock, this was impossible for us to do until roughly the millennium. And I say, roughly the year 2000 is when we started recognizing, gosh, the internet's going to be big, it's probably going to be around for a long time unless somebody really messes it up. And there's plenty of efforts to undermine the internet. You can go read Jonathan Zittrain's book, The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It, if you'd like to see sort of how that could play out. But all of a sudden we have this capability, and it is a superpower. So one of the funnier conclusions here is when people fall over dead in South Korea in PC bombs, basically little PC cafes because they played a game for too long and they didn't feed themselves, I get it. When people are addicted and lose their marriages and what, of course it's addictive, because now I can create something and put it in the world and it has consequence, right? If I were a teacher and I had 30 kids in class, and before the year 2000, they were always creating materials just for me, and nobody else is going to read them in the universe, and who cares? Disconnected from reality, disconnected from other society. Now, if we protect their actual identity because they're kids, but now they can publish for the world, and maybe what they write has consequence. All these sorts of things come out of persistence. Sorry, one last note about persistence, which is culture, as we see it now, doesn't really like persistence. This is going to sound weird, but the business models behind TV, radio, magazines, newspapers, all these sorts of things want us only to have a flow because they're inserting ads in the flow to stay alive. And when we create pools or stocks of material, and we can just go search for the one thing we want and not have to see the ad, it kind of breaks that. So they don't really like it. And we haven't figured out a better way around this whole thing. So the businesses of culture don't like persistence so much. And Google, interestingly, and the other search engines, which are sort of mostly now deceased, but Bing is there, but just doesn't have any organization that Google does. Google turns a lot of these flows into stocks that we can then go search, but you have to know what you're looking for. But this whole notion that things persist, that we can share them, that we can amplify them, make them better, is nuclear power, I mean that in a good way, for our new era.
Okay, my turn. So I think that that's clearly a very, very salient trend that we're all aware of. I will take the side of scientist. I'm a neuroscientist, so you'll see I'll tend to interpret things as I think the brain interprets them, and at least from that perspective, since that's what I spend my time doing, studying how the brain works. And I would challenge the concept of persistence by asking how this persistence that clearly exists, if you look at the trail we leave behind, if it really does exist because our brains haven't changed that much. So since we only have a limited capacity, and we know this very well, to take in information, certainly our working memory, our ability to take in information for short periods of time, but even our long-term memory. I could go on and on about memory and how it changes as we get older. I'm sure I was preaching to the choir. I'm sure you all realize that this is going on. If we can actually retain more information, then is this trail that we are leaving actually having the impact that it might have if you ignore that aspect of our brains? I think that's compounded a little bit by the fact of two things. So one is that we are gaining appreciation for the disruptive impact of a large quantity of information. One of the popular topics now, and something that I speak about quite regularly, both yesterday and tomorrow actually, is the impact of distraction and multitasking on our performance and how this occurs due to limitations of our brains. Ability to process information rapidly, to engage in multiple streams of information, to remember things for long periods of time, our need to focus our attention and not distribute it widely. All these limitations of our brain place a burden on our ability to take in all of this information. So I might argue that although we leave more of a trace, this trace is clutter, and that when we try to interpret it, we wind up actually decreasing what we actually learn. Where if we had smaller packets of information, and we could there is only one book out there that we're all reading at the same time, as opposed to millions of blogs that you could get little pieces of information on, that the impact might have been greater in the past. So it's just an observation that we see in our data when we look at the brain and how it deals with information. So I would say that that's one aspect of persistence that makes me question what it really translates to, although it's clearly happening. I think the search engines try to act like little brains and actually help you find what you need, but as you mentioned, there's a limitation on your ability to put in the right query. And as more and more information piles up, even the mighty Google might find that there's difficulty in getting exactly what you want in the top 10, which is usually as far as people look on their searches. One other aspect of this is the sort of unloading of information from your brain into cyberspace, and what that might mean, right? So we all have lists that we carry. We all have basically computers. Probably almost everyone here has a computer in their pocket through their phone now, and you have lists of things to do, you have reminders. I think we've downloaded a lot of our trace onto our devices and expect it to remind us, and I think there are potential consequences that we're not exercising these abilities to actually remember things on your own. Recently I've been deciding that if I had 4 things to get at the store, I should actually not put that in a list. I should challenge myself to hold those 4 things in mind and get there and say, there were 4, I have 3, I can come up with that last one, I know I need it. And so, you know, I think that there's a danger of persistence in the sense that you feel like it lives somewhere else, that space is incredibly crowded, and our brains might be not practicing some of the abilities that is so important for our cognitive behavior.
Cool. Well, let's stay with this a little bit longer. I think there's lots of really interesting things that I can play out from what you said. It's funny because Socrates was bemoaning the fact that the written word was going to destroy our memories and that we would no longer be able to speak. I'm almost done reading a book called Paradigm Lost, which is about the many different revolutions of printing, and seriously many. So it goes back to Gutenberg, back before Gutenberg, but you know, Gutenberg died broke. He basically went bankrupt like 3 times. He lost all his investors' money over and over again. The last guy who invested in him was a guy named Goth or something like that, I'm forgetting his actual name, who went and actually made some profit out of it, half by printing Bibles, which was pretty clever, and half by printing papal indulgences. It turned out that, you know, this was like a get out of jail free card. If you printed a lot of them, you could make more money. It was almost like minting money for the church. So, and then you get just a little bit after that, you get Martin Luther and the 95 Theses, and Martin was a clever hacker of the print system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then you get to hot metal printing, then you get to the death of hot metal and phototype setting, then you get to computers, then you get to desktop publishing, and at every stage there are different people who die, different people who live. In fact, there's this really interesting period in which the International Typesetters Union is incredibly progressive. They see the end of hot metal type and they start saying, we should learn, we just want the jobs, but we're going to learn this next thing. And they start training their own people and doing all this other kind of stuff. So, and at every stage, and there's a nice piece in this book where he says, every stage we complain that we're going to lose some feature, we're going to lose, you know, remember the arguments about calculators in school, right? And who here remembers how to do long division? Raise your hand if you know how to do long division. You guys are good. or older. Sorry if that was me. So that's one thing. Another thing is, we're unbelievably early in this shift. I believe, and I think maybe, I suspect several of you believe, that we're going through a very, very big shift. A shift as big as the arrival of movable type, let's just say. That all of us connected on the internet, on cell phones, on all this kind of stuff is a really big deal. Persistence being one piece of many, many features that have shown up that simply weren't available before. So if we're really early, A, we're going to have addictive behaviors like the kid falling off his chair dead in South Korea. But B, we really need to learn how to manage this stuff. So the fact that today we're condemning technology because there's, you know, what Linda Stone calls continuous partial attention. There's 3 or 4 curmudgeons sort of out in the field. Andrew Keen, Jaron Lanier, Nicholas Carr have all written really interesting books about how this technology is causing us to become lesser humans. And I doubt it. I doubt it. I think at some point we need to figure out how to manage this stuff. And at one point a couple years ago, I coined a term and I put a little website out called Linkido. It was Aikido, the martial art, for links, for stuff that's rushing towards you, right? We live, my email inbox is a torrent of stuff, 15% of which is really cool, and I don't want to miss it. It's like Christmas every day. 60% of which is trash, and I just need to sort through and throw overboard as quickly as I possibly can, right? But we don't have tools, actually, that let us do that really well and easily yet. We don't have, another feature that's really important, a big global do not disturb button. If you want to write some really good software for somebody and make a mint, write the do not disturb application, which can talk to all the rest of your infrastructure. And I want to create a little private cell phone company called Budaphone. It has only 2 buttons on it. One button is, all right, I'll take the call. And the other button is, I'd like X number of hours of peace and quiet. And it wins you appropriate dealing with all the inbound rush of stuff so that other people don't feel like you're just ignoring them or not present. It says, you know, Jerry is in office hours or whatever you want to call it right now, please call back in 2 hours or we will get back to you in a day or whatever else. But nobody's invented that yet, so we're in the torrent. And wouldn't it be cool if we could intentionally and purposely switch back and forth between the modes of jujitsu of the flow, this Linkido thing I was thinking about, and very deep, very conscious, very purposeful, marinating in one thing for a long time so you can do that big idea or finish that great essay. Wouldn't that be cool? We are 10 years into a 100-year stage of punctuated equilibrium in our little progress as humans on Earth. And we're trying in the process to avoid destroying the Earth. There's a whole lot of subtext here. And maybe now our ability to talk with each other will speed that up, either for good or for bad, I don't know. There's all sorts of things happening all at once. And we're connected to it all. One last thing. There's a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentine short story writer and metaphysical writer, called The Aleph. And I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful little short story. And in The Aleph, he goes to visit an acquaintance of his he doesn't really like in the city of Buenos Aires. And his friend says, "Oh, have you seen my Aleph?" And Borges says, "No, what's an Aleph?" And he says, "Well, go downstairs, go to the basement, go into the basement, go down to the second landing, lie down on the landing, and look back at the top, at the third riser, and you'll see the Aleph." So Borges does as he's told. He goes back down, he looks up, and he sees on the riser of the stair this bright spot through which he can see everything that has ever happened, everything that is happening right now, and everything that ever will happen at the same moment. Remember, he's a metaphysical writer. And he writes this beautiful long paragraph. I saw every grain of sand of every beach in the world. I saw every cell of every one of my blood cells. I saw all the letters I wrote you and never sent. I saw this, I saw that, I saw this, I saw that. It's a beautiful paragraph that I sometimes read when I have a lot of time to speech. The internet is an Aleph. It's not so good about the future. But you want to know something about, the conversion to steam from sail. You want to know something about raising German poodles. You want to know something about felt knitting. What's it called? Felting, needle felting. Needle felting. It's out there. It's there, right? And you want to know what's going on right now in Bahrain? Really, it's there. And people are working really hard to use new technologies to show you what's there. So we're at the very earliest phase of this very big transition. And all these weird behaviors like addictions and so forth, I completely empathize with and hope that we manage our way through in a reasonable way. It's a little early, I would say, to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
So I agree. I think there's a lot of alarmism about what's happening now, but I do think that it's the appropriate time to pause and say what is happening and how can we deal with it in the best way? What's the most appropriate way to deal with it? I think that with the awareness comes a better ability to control what's happening and make the outcomes more favorable. It seems that as we introduce media, and just to give sort of the evolutionary perspective like you did, and bringing on media one at a time, media has largely supplanted media that's come before it. When the radio was out, it was that, and then TV. People didn't, we just attended a lecture with a technology expert just the other day who was offering this insights into how people really didn't even read when the TV was on at one point. Now, you know what you do when the TV's on. And there seems to be a real shift in how we use all of this media. It's not just that it's more advanced or all the details that you know well about. It's just that we use a lot of them at the same time. And that seems to be very, very different. And I agree. I think that it's very alarming to think that this is the end of civilization and humanity, right? That's what's really being questioned. But it is an appropriate time to pause. The idea of being able to turn on and off is fantastic. I have changed the way I interact with technology because of my research on it, and I frequently do press my off button. I turn my phone off, quit my email program, I close my door, and I work on one thing at a time. When it's very important, very critical, that is the way that I feel that I get the highest quality. And then sometimes I love multitasking because I hate all the things I'm doing. And I just want to put them together and switch between them as rapidly as possible and make it as fun and bearable as it can be. And I'll say 3 hours, I'm just going for it. And I knew if I tried to do any one of those things for a continuous time, I would not get it done. So I think there's a way that it can be approached and a way that it cannot be approached, where it's detrimental. There are companies that that are designing software to be the off button, to shut down your email at a certain time. And there's now programs that you can press a button, or they're working on that when you're in your car, so that you don't receive calls. They automatically say, I'm driving right now, no texts, no calls. So, with the awareness of the negative impact comes the technology that we use, steps up to the challenge and gives us ways out. My biggest concern lately is not for the people in this room. It's for people that are growing up with this influence. And we learned how to sit down and do one thing for a long period of time. Now, I was actually speaking today and tomorrow at a conference that's in town called the iGeneration Conference, and it's all about education, and largely K through 12, but even college. But what is the impact of this on development and education? And those are some serious issues. There is a lot of data that suggests that this type of way that we interact with technology, that persistence is a part of, might actually change what I think of as almost the cognitive style that our youth interacts with technology. Where they, it's one thing for us to say, I get it, this has to stop sometimes for me to actually get stuff done, but it's a different thing for someone that actually never learned the skills of stopping, never learned the skills of sustained attention for long periods of time with great depth. That is concerning, and that is a really important reason to pause. For us, okay, we'll get over it. We've learned those skills, but those skills have to be learned. There are debates going on right now of whether or not universities are going to survive. Maybe there's no room for universities. Maybe people just are going to learn all this stuff that's persisting on the internet at home, through iTunes University, right? But then they might do that for 30-second increments, at which time they then check their text message, they're listening to music, they're IMing, they're doing all these things and not engaging in the depth that we all did when we were in school. And there's a danger for that. There's a question of whether or not books will be around. Not just books in the paper form, we know that's going to disappear, but books in general. Like the ability to actually read through a 400-page book. Of course, no one really does that in a sitting, but to get into a novel, you have to read enough to actually get caught into it. You can't really read for 2 minutes and get caught up in a novel. I mean, it has to be a really good novel. So you need some sustained attention to get into a book. And there's definitely a concern whether or not the children will really learn this skill enough to actually do things that we think are important. And maybe they're not important. Maybe we think they're important because we've always had them. But it's just a reason to pause. So I'm not trying to be overly alarmist. I love all this technology, personally. I just think that this is a good time for reflection and to make decisions to use the technology in the most effective way and preserve as much of what we think is important about our humanity as we can.
Awesome. You've been giving me rich loam to work with. Thank you. First, congratulations, because it appears from what you reported about yourself that you are already at least a brown belt in dealing with the new technology, because you are consciously turning things off. You are then consciously saying, to hell with it, for the next 3 hours, we're really going to go make hay with all the stuff coming at us. That is what we're all going to be learning over the next period. And some of us haven't gotten there yet, and we're just kind of like, and then you just panic, right?
Yeah, and I think the awareness, helps. The alarmism is, alarmism. It's always like a bit too much. But the awareness is important, because until you have awareness, you're like, I like all this stuff, I just want to use it all the time at, the same time. And so that's like, it seems to be our reflex to do it, and it's the addictive nature too. But even without it, that does seem to be the trend. You all know it, right? You feel it a little bit. You don't want even that downtime for 2 minutes when you're in the car when you could actually be checking your email. So it's going to take awareness of what the dangers are to modify our behavior.
Right. A friend of mine, I was just in a conversation 2 nights ago, and he was saying that one thing he does now and then to make a point is he'll walk up to a peer or a superior and he'll say, would you give me your cell phone? And just for a moment, right? Just to hold it. And then he'll start talking with them, just kind of fondling their cell phone. Pretend like he's going to take it away. And they get, please, don't do that.
How many people have left for a day and realized they left their cell phone at home? And what, did you want to go back home and get it? I mean, did you actually make it?
Run over So we're agreed there. I want to go back and question one premise you had, which is about education. And I want to actually question our current educational system. We've designed a school system that is guaranteed to be distracting, that is guaranteed to raise kids with ADD or whatever you want to call it, because the school is broken up into little 1-hour segments, which are really maybe half-hour segments between when everybody settles down, and, whatever happens, maybe it's 30 minutes. And if at the 30-minute mark, or at the end of the hour, at the 15-minute hour, or whatever it is, if you were actually somehow miraculously, genuinely into what you were doing, if you were really like connected with the assignment or your own flow, then the bell rings. And what do we all know you're going to do now? You're going to put down your pen and you're going to go to math class. And what did we just teach you? We just taught you that the big metronome outside is much more important than your passion, than your interest, than anything else. So if you want to read about the history of all this, read The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. There's a phenomenal and slightly angry book by a retired curmudgeonly New York high school teacher who's still alive. He's a little old, but still alive. And he tells us things like the 1-hour classes is actually was called the Gary Plan because it started in Gary, Indiana, where U.S. Steel, Gary was a company town, it was a U.S. Steel town. Basically, Gary, Indiana didn't exist before U.S. Steel put a plant there and then started building a town around it. They were the first ones to experiment with, instead of all the kids being in one class every day and doing lots of learning, let's send the kids around to each class. Then a couple of years later, the New York public school system experiments with this in 13 schools. That at the end of that school year, there are riots in the streets with parents and children saying, this is going to really ruin our kids' education. Parents and children are hurt by mounted police who are trying to break up the riots. And yet, the following year, the New York public school system institutes the Gary Plan on all the public schools in New York. Boom, boom, boom. From 1880 to 1910, 1920, the Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford Foundations pour more money into our educational system than the federal government, or any state, or any city. And they create a system that generates consumers and factory workers. Out of a citizenry that when de Tocqueville walks around and goes back and writes his book, was really literate and really smart. De Tocqueville writes that he goes into the backwoods of Tennessee and he finds a woodsman out there with books, subscribing to the penny press, because as opposed to England, where they had all sorts of taxes and it was really expensive to print and receive things, we made getting printed materials incredibly cheap in this country, which boosted literacy like crazy. People, and frontiers people and farmers had to be really smart. They were busy raising a family, making a living, trading, doing whatever else they had to do. They were just really smart people. Why was a person like that going to get up and go work in a factory and do Fordism for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or 14 hours a day at the start before labor unions kind of got wind? It's a really complicated piece of history here, and I'm going a little too far afield, but I just want to say that we've already got a system that is guaranteed to raise very distracted human beings who don't have much of an attention span, who don't have much of a passion for anything because they were never allowed to light on a branch long enough to pursue an interest. So I'm a big fan of a word I've learned not to use, which is unschooling. I've learned instead to use informal learning.
I certainly don't think our system is perfect, but wouldn't you, being required, even if it's a half an hour to engage in one topic, don't you think an entirely unstructured system where there's just availability to all this information and children are allowed to take it in whatever form they want is going to lead to even greater fragmentation?
I think it would lead to a really educated citizenry. And if we had kids who identified that they needed structure, we could give them a structured school. But what we're doing now is called the compulsory education system because we can compel you. Like, you go to jail if your kids don't show up. And in California, I don't think homeschooling is yet fully legal. And the legislation varies state by state. So what we've done, with the good intent of having an educated citizenry, we've instituted a mechanized left-brain managerial system to make sure everybody gets exposed to everything on this Stalinist schedule. We've then taken the old 30,000 school boards that used to exist across the US, they were tiny and local. We've consolidated them up. And now whatever the Texas school board decides are the textbooks for the next 5 years. Every 5 years they rotate through one of the subjects. Whatever they decide is going to be the textbook, it's bought by half the other school boards in this country. It's shocking. It's shocking. So when we get these really weird debates about should evolution be taught or this or that, and when we look at a school and think, Why can't the teacher bring external books into class? What is up with that? Didn't Joseph Stalin determine something like this? We've got that system. We built it. With good intentions, we're trying to make everybody smart, and what we're doing is we're not trusting them. And I'm saying, if we actually trusted people, and if we saw the resources that are at hand, and if we created a new infrastructure to help any child identify what is their learning style, what might they want to be curious about, and then to equip them to go dive, they would sit with something for weeks at a time. And they would learn from anything. They would learn math, they would learn music. If I wanted to build a diorama of the Battle of Waterloo for 2 years, I could. If I wanted to write about this glass of wine for 2 years, I could write about the whole universe.
I think that that's what would happen if they were adults and they were allowed to explore the internet and focus on their interests, but they're not, they're children, and I think that they need to be compelled to a certain style that they won't navigate to on their own. And this is largely to do with the development of these skills that we actually study in our lab. They're cognitive abilities. We call them top-down control, which is sort of the flip side of bottom-up. Animals, other than human beings, have a very strong bottom-up influence. What that means is that you have two influences on the way you attend to the world. One of them is that the environment itself imposes itself upon you. If there's a flash of light, if there's a sound that's very loud, if it's your name, anything that's very salient, very novel, you pay attention to independent of your goals. That's bottom up, the environment imposing itself upon you. What you're doing now is the opposite of that. It's top down. You're paying attention because your goals are to pay attention. And this influence on how you attend to the world is a balance between your goals and the environment, top down and bottom up. The part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that controls this top down process is the part that evolved the most. It's what animals are, besides humans, are actually missing the most. They're very bottom up. They're very sensitive to their environments. They would much easily pick up on a scent or see another animal that was a threat than we would. But they are not as much in control of how they perceive the world. That is a very distinctly human feature, is top-down control. This ability to control how you interact with the world based on your goals is not just something that travels throughout evolution, it's something that happens throughout development. Children do not have this skill. They are much more bottom-up. They have a goal, they see something else in the environment that might have a strong stimulus, their goals change. They're influenced by their bottom-up surroundings, and they don't have top-down control. This skill is not something that develops in 8-year-olds. It's something that develops like in late teens. As you're probably all aware, teenagers are also very bottom-up driven. At some point, we gain some semblance of control. The sad part is it all disappears as you get older. That top-down control, you become more bottom-up as you age, probably due to changes of this prefrontal network. So my concern is that if children are allowed to their own devices and they don't have top-down control, they will be driven by stimuli only, not by goals, and that they will be fleetingly invested in learning things, and they won't gain the depth that you need to learn something that's very complicated. I feel, why do we learn calculus? Who uses calculus? Anyone in this room use calculus? No. Many of us.
Raise your hand if you use calculus on a daily basis.
Not really.
Well, that's impressive. If you even use it once a year, I'm impressed. But I think that we learn to do calculus so that we learn to understand, we learn to learn things that are very hard. We learn what it takes to learn something that's really hard to do. And you can't learn it easily. You have to sort of just suffer through it and learn it. If you're a kid, you're just not gonna ever learn calculus on your own without someone telling you to. And the skills of learning calculus are what we use all the time. It's not the calculus that we use, it's the depth of thinking that we've learned. And I'm just afraid that children just don't have that skill set. And if you don't develop it, by the time you do have top-down control, you don't have the systematic way of approaching a problem. And so, I don't know.
First, I'm going to traipse into the realm of what the brain does and learning and whatever, and you're the neuroscientist on stage here, so I do this with great hesitation and trepidation, so if you'll permit me, I'll sort of wander in that direction. I'm a newbie in that area. Second, I think it's interesting that you said that we won't learn anything in depth when the current system isn't designed to let us do anything in depth. The current system moves us from thing to thing so quickly and gives us so many assignments and so many different things because we've got so much to master in all these disciplines that we can't actually spend the kind of time we might want to spend on any one thing. And in fact, when the system doesn't work, what do? We rotate the knob to 11. I'm quoting Spinal Tap here. We rotate the knob to 11. We take away more of the child's day by giving them more homework, by lengthening the school day, by lengthening the school year, and taking away summer vacation, so that children never have a moment to actually be curious about something and go pursue their own passion. So they don't have any ownership investing in the thing they want to do. And then we just keep cranking it up. NCLB is this horrible, pathetic way of using left brain thinking to really implement this through the whole nation. And with the very good intent of creating a smarter citizenry, right? So there's a book called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. I don't know if you've read it. It's lovely. It's about neuroscience and the role of the left and right hemispheres, which isn't as clear, it's not clear cut. But he says, look, the emissary is your left brain. Your left brain is logical, linear, algorithmic. Your emissary has no idea there's a right brain. It thinks it knows how to do everything. It basically thinks it knows how to achieve things. It just executes, and it has no clue that there's any other thing going on. It's not very good at processing novel stimuli. It's kind of algorithmic. The right brain is the master, and the right brain is like, damn it, got this left brain around. It's doing a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's doing the right stuff, sometimes it's the wrong stuff. It has to sort of influence it and correct it and figure out what to do. Our society has in some weird way been taken over by the left brain. And I tend to borrow from Taoism and call this yin and yang, that we've been suffering from a yang overdose for either 300 or 3,000 years. And engineers, scientists, mechanistic, rational, logical people with very good intentions have designed all the institutions that are surrounding us, including our educational system. We've consumerized voting, we've consumerized healthcare, we've consumerized entertainment, we've consumerized every sector of our economy. And there's different ways of doing all of these things. And you can see evidence of the different way, of the unified left and right brain way together, all over the place, with movements that are arising out of the populace on this weird thing called the internet that has this magical property called persistence and a bunch of other properties. It's just showing up. But if you think that people are not born smart and can't get things done, then you won't see that. You'll think that, well, no, we just have to go back. I'll tell one last story from the underground history of American education. Gatto spends a lot of time talking about kids who dropped out of school and did really cool stuff at a very remarkably young age. So Admiral David Farragut was our first admiral, way back in the days of the War for Independence. I had to go fact check myself. I had to go look this up because I was actually quoting the years wrong. I was saying that he was put into the Navy as a midshipman when he was 12 years old, which was typical of a naval family back then. If your child was going to be a naval officer, you just threw them into the Navy when they were, actually he went into the Navy at 9. At 9 years old, he was on board a ship as a Navy, with rank over all the regular seamen, right? Rank over them. At age 12, what he got was command of his first ship, because his captain had taken a British prize and needed to get the prize back to port. So he puts Farragut on board and says, get it back to port. And the captain of the captured captain says, no way I'm going anywhere with a 12-year-old telling me what to do. And Farragut says, if he shows his head above decks, have him shot. So the word adolescence was invented. The word adolescence didn't used to exist. Very young people are capable of extraordinary things. We do have developmental phases, but when we treat children as children for a really long time, including into undergraduate until they're 18 or 20 or 22, they will be children. But when we connect them to the world and expect things from them and understand that they love hard fun, that they love thorny problems, they like having a consequence, really brilliant things happen. And a lot of dysfunctions go away, and then they don't need gangs for initiation, because what they did was they initiated by inventing something, by fixing something that was broken in their neighborhood, by inventing something, by discovering a supernova as a 10-year-old girl did a month ago. Right? Cool, cool stuff that's real in the world. But we've developed this incredibly intricate system with infrastructure and rules and expectations. Like, of course you're going to go to school for 12 years, then you're going to go to college for 4 years, then you're going to go to grad school, then maybe you get to work in something you might hate because you've never experienced it. What have we done? It's not so what we've done.